Welcome to GMP, the Great, Glorious, and Glamorous, aka the Going North Podcast, where authors from around the world help you realize that success is tangible. You'll leave with at least one new piece of inspiration or information to help you keep going north every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. Now let's get on with the show. Today's episode is sponsored by yours truly, Dominic Dom Brightman's wonderful book, Stay the Course, The Elite Performer's 7 Secret Keys to Sustainable Success. Grab it on ebook, audiobook, or paperback book and share this gift to your friends, family, heck, even no matter what season it is, for that wonderful person in your life that needs to advance their next level in their career or just needs a quick pick-me-up to get through their day and beyond to thrival level. Now let's get on with the show. And today on the Highlight Reel Builder for Authors, the Going North podcast, we're bringing some super special, awesome humans from across the globe who've put pen to paper and joined the business of immortality by publishing their books. It's another wonderful guest, courtesy of Mr. Eminem. That's right, the man with all the wonderful book candy, Mr. Mickey Mickelson. Because my goodness, today's guest in particular, another Canadian great from the land of old Canada, baby. That's right. Because today's guest, a former software developer, former actor turned mystery author, and might as well say best-selling author, because my man has a whole mystery series of 7 books with more to come that have tons and tons of wonderful rave reviews. And today's guest in particular was born in Oxford, but now he lives in the beautiful city of Vancouver, British Columbia. So let's give it up for Mr. RPF himself, Mr. Robert P. French. How you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Dom. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Woohoo! It is great to have you here indeed, because my goodness, man, like that's kind of an interesting background, because when I think about it, a lot of folks may say software developer and actor. Like most folks would think those are separate.
Well, you see, software developers are always screwing up and say they've learned to lie. And that's kind of useful to become an actor, you know?
Well,
Yeah, I loved acting, but the desire to write really kind of overtook the desire to act. So that's why I switched arts, as it were.
there you go, indeed. There you go, indeed. You probably won't have to be less mobile and probably won't have to remember lines as much, because if I'm not mistaken, you actually started your writing career when you almost turned 60, right?
Yeah, I was 59, and I had been a chief technology officer in a company, and unfortunately, the company didn't make it. So I did what software developers out of a job always do. I started looking for contract work, and I spent a day on the phone to people, and I sat down and I thought, you know, I've got this book in the back of my head. I think I'm going to start writing it. And this was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I started writing, and I was still writing at 3 in the morning. So I thought, yeah, I kind of like this. I'm going to keep this up. So it took me 3 partial books written, and then I wrote a complete book that was awful. And then I actually got very lucky, and I met an editor, and she did a review of the book that I'd written, and she didn't say it was awful, but it was. And so I told her about an idea that I had for a book, and she mentored me through that whole process. And she mentored me through the next book as well. And she's the person who really taught me what the craft of writing is about. And I spent, certainly in the early days, a lot of time taking courses on the craft of writing. And And I think it's fair to say that, and most of my readers, I think, would agree that my books continue to get better. So I really, that really means a lot to me, because it's always disappointing for me as a reader when I read a great book and the next book in the series isn't that good. You know, I've had that experience. And when I started writing, I said I would never let that happen. So I think the most important thing for a writer, and we have to do it, spend a lot of time doing marketing and so on, but an important thing for a writer, I think, is to continue to increase your knowledge of the craft. That's and if there are any aspiring writers listening, I would say that that is the most important thing.
There we go. There we go. Indeed, keeping that sword sharp, or should I say, keeping that pen all inked up. Indeed, that's right.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, I mentioned, talking of keeping the pen inked up, I mentioned that I'd written some stories in my 20s, some horror stories, and that was before things like word processors. And I typed them all on an old, broken down portable typewriter using computer paper for stationery. And I've still got those stories in a folder in my filing cabinet.
So think you'll ever let those see the light of day on a blog or something?
I don't think so. They're not really good enough, and they're very dated now, because these were written in the 1960s, so they're pretty dated. But it was fun. It's fun to get them out and look at them from time to time. I do that every few years.
Uh, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. Sweet. So my goodness, I had a nice, wonderful career in the computer science world and then in the acting world, and led you to the writing world where you're penning all these great novels where you just keep getting better and better. So, in addition to, of course, writing and having a great editor, is there anything else you've been doing to keep up your craft in terms of keeping your pen all inked up?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that I do that keeps me on my toes as a writer is that I don't plan books in great detail. You know, some writers will plan out a book and they'll write an outline of each chapter in advance of writing anything, and write out character descriptions and so on. I don't do any of that. Um, when I start writing, I've got a vague idea what the story is about. I've got no idea, you know, who's going to be the good guys, who are going to be the bad guys, but I just start writing. And I let the book go where it wants to go, and I let it surprise me, because if I surprise myself, then I'm going to surprise my readers. As kind of an example of, you know, I might be writing and a character is at home and the doorbell rings, and they go to the door, and I was expecting that the person at the door was going to be a cop, say. Well, when they open the door, I'll frequently have it be somebody completely different from what I was expecting. And I think that that kind of keeps me on my toes. Frequently, I'll write myself into a corner and I'll say, gee, how am I going to get out of this corner? I've written the plot in such a way now. What am I going to do? But it's good because my readers will feel that way too. And hopefully I can write my way out of the corner and continue the book. So I think that's one of the ways I keep the ink in my pen, as you so nicely put it.
uh, Definitely gotta love it. And the beautiful thing about speaking with writers, especially the creative ones who write novels, is the fact that I didn't like pantsing. Like I believe that's what it's called, where you
Yeah,
just
pantsing.
write
Yeah,
and Yeah, with all that, where you just, in a way, metaphorically, you just sit down to write and then just metaphorically explodes onto the page with all the wonderful stories you're crafting. So, what helps you to get out of that rut once you've started the plot and you feel like, man, how am I going to get out of this? What helps you to find the next level to get out of it?
Well, a beer helps sometimes. But yeah, as I'm writing, I'm tracking. I keep a spreadsheet which has a line in it for each scene, so I can kind of look back over the book and say, well, if I change that chapter back there to do one little thing differently, it will let me get out of this thing that I'm in. Um, or I'll just kind of work on it and try and work out a way that to get myself out of the corner that I've painted myself into. Um, but for me, that's the great thing about writing. The thing I love the most about the craft of writing is the way in which the book seems to grow by itself. And sometimes I'll have the characters do something completely out of character for them, and it leads to an interesting place very often. Without giving any spoiler alerts, in my very first book, Cal Rogan, who is my protagonist, is a drug addicted ex-cop living on the streets, and his best friend is murdered. And when the police come to investigate, one of them is a cop that Cal absolutely hates, and this cop, whose name is Nick Stamo, hates him as well. Well, a few books later on, they become partners in a detective agency. Because and that was all comes about because I decided to have this Nick Stamo guy do something out of character that showed that although he was unpleasant in many ways, he had a real strong moral position on some things. And I started to like him, and Cal started to like him, and they ended up doing this detective agency. So that's one of the things I would never, when writing that first book or even the second book, I would never have imagined that by the third book they would start a detective agency. So it's fun. I couldn't imagine writing a book where you plan it all out in advance. I don't know how some very successful writers do that, and they write wonderful stuff. Um, that's just not the way that I can work.
Ah, definitely can say that again. That's right. That's right indeed. Bitter rivals become friends over time. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Well, I mean that happens in real life, doesn't it? I mean, I remember somebody I worked with um, years and years ago. My initial impression of him was that I didn't like him very much, but over time he actually became a really good friend, and we're still in touch. So many years later. So things like that do happen.
Oh yeah, definitely can say that again. And what's even more interesting about the whole pantsing process that you go through, you actually did a lot of research into addictions in preparation, or probably during the whole process of this series, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. A ton of research. I'm pretty research oriented as a writer.
Ah, there we go, there we go. That's right. And if I'm not mistaken, you actually came in one way, and then after you did some research, you changed your whole entire view about drugs.
Well, that's true. When I was researching this book, I talked to a number of drug addicts and alcoholics, because there are alcoholics in the book as well. with Cal in the first book is living on the streets. So he meets a lot of addicts and alcoholics. And I spoke to a lot of them, and I had to spend a long time with a former addict who ran an organization called the Vancouver Drug Users Association. And it was an association to help drug users. And I spent a lot of time with this guy. We had a couple of lunches, and at one point he walked me through the area of Vancouver where all the drug deals go down. And he was explaining to me how it all happened. So I learned a heck of a lot from him. But I came to the realization that drugs are not a lot different. Illegal drugs, like let's take heroin and cocaine. What's the difference between heroin and cocaine and beer and tobacco? Um, the drug addict I mentioned that I had so many conversations with, he said it was harder for him to kick tobacco than it was to kick heroin. So, you know, tobacco is as addictive as heroin. And I've come to the very, very strong belief that I can defend, I think, pretty strongly, that all drugs should be legalized and controlled. Not just decriminalized, but actually legalized. And the, we have legal alcohol and we have legal tobacco. And the government is very, very, very good at controlling those. And why not do the same with drugs? I would like to see a world where a heroin addict can go to 7-Eleven and by showing that he's an adult, 19 years or older, can actually buy heroin across the counter. That's what I'd like to see, because that way he would know that the heroin is pure. On the package, it would tell him the strength of the heroin. There would be no fentanyl in it. It wouldn't be laced with anything else. And he can then take it and use it. Because trying to stop people using drugs just ain't going to work. And that's been proven again and again and again. So why not legalize it, control it, and control is the very important thing. As much as I hate the tobacco companies, you could give them a franchise to sell heroin or cocaine or any of the drugs that aren't disastrously physically bad, like PCBs, for example. You can't have anyone selling those. But it would be one of the things it would do, it would take all the profits out of the drug gangs, all their profits would be gone. For the users, they wouldn't have to pay the ridiculous amounts that the drug gangs charge for their products. So users wouldn't need to be stealing from people in order to pay for their drug habits. Plus, on each package of heroin or cocaine or whatever it is they were buying, it would have a warning saying this stuff is potentially bad for your health, and phone this number if you want help with your addiction. And that's kind of a very brief overview of what I've come to believe. And it hasn't been tried anywhere in the world, but if I could persuade somebody in the Canadian government to look at it seriously, I think that would be a great place to start. So that's my lecture for the day.
Hey, that's an interesting take, though, because a lot of folks wouldn't go that route. But do you think it could be the fact that the government hasn't really taken regulation over all sorts of other drugs, like the ones you mentioned earlier? Do you think that could be another reason why folks tend to get addicted to it? Because it's like, oh yeah, I feel kind of naughty or whatever. The mystique of it, having to go behind closed doors and go to dealers and have to get those certain
Yeah,
options.
I think you're absolutely right there. I think you've really hit the nail on the head. Um, People take drugs because they're illegal, because there's that mystique about them. Um, And if you take that away, um, for example, look back to the United States and Prohibition. When alcohol wasn't allowed to be sold, well, then it was more exciting to buy it and drink it and go to speakeasies and things like that. um, and I think the same applies to drugs. Another thing that is said against uh, legalizing drugs is parents will often say, oh, I don't want drugs legalized. It makes it too easy for my kids to get the drugs. Well, that is 100% wrong. If you talk to any high school kid and say to him, what is easier for you to get? Some crack or a 6-pack of beer? And he'll tell you it's easier to get the drugs. Because to get the beer, he's got to go and stand outside a liquor store and persuade an adult to go in and buy it for him. To get the drugs, everyone in high school knows the kids who are selling the drugs. So they just go to the kids who sell the drugs and buy them. So legalizing, the kids who sell drugs in high school, their business model disappears. The drug gangs can't afford to pay them to do that anymore. There's nothing in it for the drug gangs. So legalizing will not make it easier for kids to get their hands on drugs.
Very interesting. Because the only thing I could think about that is the whole fake ID business. If they can find somebody who can make a fake ID that actually looks good enough to pass by a lazy adult, because that's the only
Yeah,
other
yeah,
thing too.
yeah. That's true. But then they've got to go to the trouble of getting the fake ID. Um, Whereas right now they don't need a fake ID to buy drugs. They just go to the sketchy kid that they know or one of his friends, and they buy drugs from them. So it still make to get the fake ID is still harder than it is now. Obviously, you're not going to stop kids getting drugs who want them, but maybe if they're legalized, they'll actually be a little bit less attractive to kids. As as you said earlier, there's that mystique about things when they're illegal.
Oh yeah, yes indeed, yes indeed.
Mhm.
So, so my
I,
goodness. So, oh, go ahead.
so no, so I was just going to say I was talking to a podcaster a few weeks back, and we were talking about this very subject, and it was near and dear to his heart because his son had recently died of an overdose, and he said that he is absolutely sure that if drugs had been legal, his son would not have died because his son took some drugs that were actually laced with other drugs, and that's what killed him. And so, one of the big problems with drugs when you buy them illegally, you have no idea what you're getting. And if they're legalized and the controlled is the really important thing, then at least you know what you're getting. So anyway, sorry, I interrupted you there, Don.
Hey, it's all good. It's all good. It's great to bring up that story because, funny enough, as you mentioned that, one of our past guests actually, Laura Stack, her son actually passed away from a lot of marijuana use when they legalized it in
Mm-hmm.
Colorado. And not only that, also the darn products that became from the deep's oil. If I'm not mistaken, it's a tea something. I forgot the exact. It's
THC?
THC. There we go. THC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they basically took the most powerful, potent part of the plant and then just
Mm-hmm.
made all these other products and enhanced it with all these edibles and everything else, and it just really led him to suicide. So yeah, it's definitely interesting taking, probably. I'm sure the government would be happy to do that one. They'd be like, oh, sweet. We get to collect more money? Oh, shoot. Let's do
Absolutely.
this.
Well, in Canada, marijuana is now legal, and the controls are incredible. A friend of mine is starting a business making edibles, and she has to go through so many hoops with the government to get this business up and running, which is good because it's good to know that the controls are there. But Laura in Colorado, uh, that I don't think that marijuana is controlled and legalized in the same way as we do it here. So it's a terrible. It's awful. It must be awful for any parent to lose their kids, especially to drugs. It's just awful.
Oh, yeah. Awful indeed. So, my goodness. So, getting back to your fabulous books, my man has got 7 out of 7. So, my goodness, is there going to be an eighth one coming out soon? I know the whole pandemic ruined your flow along with many others with the writing.
Well, I'm working on the eighth one now. I'm about 15% into it. And I took a break over Christmas and New Year's. I just needed a mental break. Um, but I'm back on it now, and I'm hoping to have that out in the late spring. Maybe not the late spring, maybe the mid spring. And um, I'm also planning another book before the end of the year. So I'd like to have 2 books out this year. So um, the one that I'm working on now is really interesting. It came about because I of a podcast that I listened to. It was about a woman entrepreneur who um, invented this fake cryptocurrency called OneCoin and sold billions of dollars of this cryptocurrency, and it didn't exist.
Ouch.
No.
Ouch.
So I thought, what an interesting story. I could write a novel around something like that. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. I mean, the cryptocurrency thing isn't the main thrust of the novel, but it's certainly part of it. So yeah, I'm enjoying this book. It's turning out to be fun.
My goodness. Well, that one sounds like it's going to be a freaking treat. My goodness. My goodness.
Yeah, um, it's funny. The other day I had to read one of my old books because I was using a character from one of the previous books that I wanted to use in this book, and I wanted to check up on some things about the character to make sure I didn't kind of contradict myself, as I have done in the past. Um,
Yep.
and I was reading this book that I wrote several years ago, and it still surprised me. It was it was very strange reading my own book a few years afterwards. I don't know if other writers have this experience, but I'd kind of forgotten parts of it, and it was kind of
Yep.
interesting to read.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind on this show was Ann Charles from 2021. She's also was a I'm not sure she still is part of Mickey's camp, but yeah, she's penned a lot of books, and she always likes to talk about the wonderful fun times, sarcastically, of having to reread all of her past novels to make sure she doesn't contradict herself in the future novels.
Yeah, it was funny. When I when my latest novel is called Jailed, and it's about a kid who's in jail for a crime he didn't commit. And when I was one of my advanced readers, I mentioned a character, and she said, "I just read your first book. Didn't that character die in your first book?" And I thought, oh my God. And she was right. So I had to go back to the first book and change the character's name in the first book.
Oh, wow.
So that because the new character has been in several of the books, so I had to go back and change the first book to change his name. That was fun.
Oh, wow. So what you're
I'm not
saying
going to
is
make
there's
that mistake.
well, there you go. So what you're saying is there's a few select group of people that have a collector's item out there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Actually, quite a lot of people.
Uh,
It's yeah, it's very yeah, it's very humbling when you discover you made such a basic mistake.
oh yeah, definitely could say that again.
Mm.
So my goodness, you've been on this tour of podcasts recently promoting your wonderful work out there and future work. Is there a question you wish you would be asked more often when you're on the wonderful microphone?
That's a that's a good question, Dom. Not really. I mean, I've found, yeah, I'm a big podcast listener, and I really enjoy podcasts. But I've found that the podcasts that Mickey has got me on, all of the all of the hosts of the podcasts are just great. You know, they ask good questions, and questions that make me think. And I think uh, I've I've got a huge respect for what you guys do as podcasters. It's really difficult. You're dealing with different people all the time, and yet you always seem to come up with good questions and good ideas. And uh, I love it. It's great. So I can't think of anything that I wish I'd been asked. People have even asked me about, I quite often, if I've had a good day of writing, I quite often celebrate with a craft beer, and I'll take a photograph of the craft beer and post it on Facebook. So I've even been asked by podcasters, what's my favorite craft beer?
Uh, well, all right. So basically, if your folks on Facebook, your fans, if they don't see no craft beer, that means it wasn't a good writing day then.
That's right.
It's like I gotta wait even longer, folks.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I'll put a picture of the craft beer on and say, this isn't for celebration. This is because it didn't work.
uh, that's what I'm talking about.
My
But
protagonist, Cal Rogan, is very different from me in very, very many ways. The only two things we have in common is we both like Shakespeare and we both like craft beer. But
and
apart
they
from that, we're
rhyme.
quite different.
That's what I'm talking about. Well, since we got on beverages, might as well get on to food. So, since your most recent book is titled Jailed, if it was a food item, what would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, it would be a persimmon because it's kind of bitter and sweet. Yeah, I think that might be an answer.
Sweet. That's what I'm
Yeah,
talking about indeed.
yeah, yeah. There's the issue of the kid who's in jail is under threat by a drug gang in the jail who've got it in for him for some reason. And So Cal Rogan is fighting against the clock to find evidence to get this kid out of jail. And I just as an aside, I don't always go for the happy ending. In several of my books, the ending isn't a happy ending. In some of them, it is. So I think the latest book, Jailed, could be described as a persimmon. Yeah, so that was a great question.
Sweet. All right, cool, cool, cool. So far, I've been 20-1 with that question, so I love the progress.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Sweet. So, folks, better pick up that book and all the others. So, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive, and that is if you were to wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but you're in the year of 2022 with all of your knowledge and experience, what advice would you give to yourself?
25. That's a very good question. The first thing that came to mind is to say, okay, sit down and start writing. Because if I had all the knowledge that I have now, then that would certainly be a doable thing. On the other hand, I don't know. I think I would say, yeah, sit down and write. Stop all this computer stuff that you've been doing and start writing. Yeah, that's a good question. But I'm not 100% sure about that. Yeah, well, could you wave a magic wand and do that for me, Dom? Because I'd really like that.
Well, if you got a different answer, that's cool. This ain't live, so.
You can edit the heck out of it, can't you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, whisk me back 52 years. That would be great.
Yeah, exactly. It's be like, it's like, Dad, why you look extremely young? Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's good.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah.
Oh man. So for those who want to keep in contact with you and keep up with all the wonderful writing that you're doing, what's the best way for folks to do so?
If they go to my website, which is robertpfrench.com, there's a contact page where if they can email me if they want, or they can give me their email address and I'll send them out a newsletter every couple of weeks. And also on robertpfrench.com, there's all my books listed and how to get them. And any of your listeners who go to robertpfrench.com, you'll find that my first book is available free. So they can start to read about Cal Rogan without having to pay for it. So that's only for visitors to my website. Do they get it free?
Woohoo! Well, there you have it, folks. Visit robertpfrench.com, y'all. That's right, robertpfrench.com. Check out book number 1 and buy all of them indeed. You'll get the whole collection. He's even got some multi-packs as well for books 1 through 3 and books 4 through 6, y'all. That's right indeed. So my man's cooking up all the words in the stew, baby. It's going to be good stuff. Oh, man. So any parting words before we close up shop, Robert?
Yeah, I would like to say a big thank you. I've really enjoyed this. It's been fun. It's been relaxed. And this was a bit of a stressful day for me. So it was lovely to just sit and chat with you before I think about dinner. So because it's just coming up to 5 o'clock here on the West Coast. So Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this.
Thanks a bunch for tuning in and setting aside some of your time to listen to this wonderful podcast, Going North. If you really enjoyed what you heard, do me a solid and share this with your network and someone that you care about that would get something out of it too. And be sure to subscribe to hear more, and heck, even check out the backlog if you would like, because there are hundreds of episodes to choose from, and they just keep getting better and not butter.